I didn't know what to do with any of my kids. I just sent them to the room. There was madness in my house. There was madness going on there, and I didn't know what to do with my kids. And we lived that way for long many years. My daughter told me the other day that she listens to all my tapes. I talk around the country from time to time. And she always gets a hold of my tapes to see what I'm thinking about her, she says. Because we can't talk today. We do our best. And I had to surrender her. I had to give her up as best I could, and she went on in her life, and my sponsor and I walked through this thing, and one more time, this daughter is not the source of my happiness. It's fruitless for me to offer her the thing that works for me. It just is. And when I was able to do that and walk my own life, God could take care of her. As long as I'm there, hovering over her, God can't get through Mama. If Mama can step back, God can see his own kid and he can do something with her. I blocked the sunlight of the Spirit from my own daughter. So God said, leave her alone. And it's the hardest thing I've ever done is to admit that I am powerless over my daughter. There's a mother-daughter thing that goes on that's tougher for me, tougher for more people I know than the mother-son stuff. Mother-daughter stuff is just crappy. I know there's some mama and daughters here this weekend. I'm just delighted y'all are sharing it. It's wonderful. I moved out from the state of Texas. I was in Oklahoma. I found another major alcoholic. And I was over in Oklahoma, and I went back to Lubbock, my hometown, for a convention 5.5 years ago. And on a Thursday night, I went to this convention. My daughter went with me just so she could pay, what she had to do, just pay her dues, be with Mother for a minute while Mother was in town. And she went to this convention with me on Thursday night so she could get it over with. She said she liked to hear the racy stories, and they'd go out to the bar and talk about them. And this Thursday night, 5.5 years ago, she heard her story. My daughter is sober. 5.5 years. There is no miracle in my life greater than that, I don't think. God, I love my daughter. I love her. She's just such a pain in the ass. I hope she hears that one. Give me one of them. She's sober. And it was absolutely nothing I did. It was nothing. Possibly because I walk. I try to walk what I talk. Possibly. That had something to do with it. Possibly because I stayed out of her life. That had something to do with it. Possibly. I sat across the room that night and I watched a man in Alcoholics Anonymous that I had known for years 12-step my daughter. There's a 12-step that went on here last night at the table. Did y'all know that? A 12-step was made in this very room. Is that a miracle or what? Is that amazing or what? And I watched it. I watched this man I've known for years 12-step my daughter, and what a sight it was. I'm telling you, I sat over across that room and just sobbed. And I watched her. I watched her face. I watched the pain, and I watched the anger, and then I saw some hope, and then I'd go back to the pain, and then it was the hope, and it was marvelous. That man told her something that she shared with me that I always try to share. He said to her, Tracy, God puts a piece of white velvet inside of every human being. He allows nothing to touch that white piece of velvet. Nothing. And that's what he loves and strokes and touches. And I could not wait till the next day. I went to the store and I bought her a piece of white velvet, and I bought this gorgeous, very pink, fluffy frame and put that white velvet and gave it to my daughter, and it's still beside her bed. It's just a marvelous thing for me. And she's walking through this program, admitting that she's powerless in what's going on in her life. What a miracle. Shortly thereafter, my 11-year-old son, now he's 11. He's okay. He's 11. I mean, what can an 11-year-old do except play baseball? They called me from school. He and his buddy were in the closet sniffing a chemical up their nose. I said, "Excuse me?" And I went and got him, and we went to the doctor, we did all that stuff, and we got him home, and I said, "I've been in the program a long time." And I looked at him, and I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said the words that just made my blood turn cold and stop moving in my veins. I've heard it a jillion times from this podium. He said, "Mama, I like the way it makes me feel." I want you to know, at that moment, I surrendered. At that moment, I admitted defeat. At that moment, I knew I was lost. And so I got into action. I called my sponsor. I called an AA person. I said, "I need some help here. This is my son. He's 11. For God's sakes, he's going to die. Help me." And we decided to put him in a boys' ranch to save his life. His drunk daddy found out about it, come kidnapped him, and off they went, and I hadn't seen him hardly since. He's 22. And when I did hear from him, he called and he said, "Mama, I'm all right, and I'm going to stay with my daddy. Bye." I thought, well, you ungrateful little son of a bitch. After all I had done for him. So I released with love. No problem. My son didn't live with me after that, and I really didn't even... I tried to go see him and his daddy after a while. They moved to Houston, and then they come back, and I tried to go there and visit. And his daddy was just an insane man, and I just brought up the insanity. I mean, there was something hooked to me that he just sent him off like a flash. And the last time I saw my son, I went over there and was visiting with him. My son didn't live with me after that, and I really didn't even... I tried to go see him and his daddy after a while. They moved to Houston, and then they come back, and I tried to go there and visit. And his daddy was just an insane man, and I just brought up the insanity. I mean, there was something hooked to me that he just sent him off like a flash. And the last time I saw my son, I went over there and was visiting with him, and I left, and of course I didn't do something right, and the drunk was about half drunk, and he chased me out the yard, and he kicked me right in the middle of the back. I never have figured out he kicked me, and he was running, and I was running. And I landed over this fence. I just grabbed this fence and tore my arms, and there's people out. It was Sunday afternoon, and people were watching, and I was so humiliated. I knew at that point that was it. I really surrendered. There was just no way. And I called my sponsor, and she said, "You're probably going to have to let him be." And I just let him be. And it was a painful thing for me. But after a while, it got to be okay. And one of the terrible things that I had to admit to my sponsor much later was, I don't want him back. I don't want the madness in my house. I've had all I can take. I can't stand anymore. I've lost my husband. I've lost my daughter. This is my son. I got a little peace at home. I'm alone, but I got some peace. And I don't want that child back. It was the hardest thing I had to admit. And she said, remember the story that this man told, and I remembered it. It's this story. It's a snake. It's a rattlesnake, and it's winter, and he's laying on the ground, and it's just cold. It's ice and snowstorm out. And a man comes by, and the snake says, "Oh, please, mister, I'm freezing to death. Could you get me and just put me inside your shirt for just a little while and get me warm?" And the man said, "You got to be crazy." I said, "I know what, you're a rattlesnake." He said, "Oh, but wait a minute. Look at this weather. Do you think that I would do anything if you would help me? I just need to get warm. Please, just put me in your shirt for a little while. I won't do anything. Just get me there. I promise. I promise you. All I need is just a little bit of warmth or I'm going to die. I'll die. The man said, well, okay. You promise. He picked him up and put him in there and he got him all warm. The snake said, yes, I am warm. Oh, I am so grateful. Thanks. And then he bites him and spreads his venom. The man yanks him out and threw him down. And he said, you promised me. Why did you do that? And the snake looked up and said, you knew exactly what I was when you picked me up. I knew exactly what my little son was. I knew exactly what he was headed for. He had the disease of alcoholism. And I could not, literally, I did not have the strength of the heart of the soul to do that. And I had to surrender. The only thing that kept me absolutely sane through all this was my sponsor taught me about step 2. And step 2 says, came to believe that there's a power greater than me that can restore me to sanity. That's the only thing that kept me sane. A power greater than myself. She says, and they said, came to, and then came to believe. See, I believed in your power as the group. I believed in the power of my sponsor because she lived a life that was incredible to me. And I believed that. And so I would go with what she said and how she said it. Step 2 said to me, said she, that there's a power, it's higher than you. Look at the electricity in this room. There's a switch over there. If you want the light on, you go flip the electric switch, don't you? Do you ever stop and think about the kilowatt, about the passage, about the pole and where the lights is? And I said, well, no. If I want a light, I go switch the power on. She said, that's all you have to do. Is just switch the power. Flip a switch and see what happens. See, I didn't believe in God, and I didn't want to. And I told her that on a regular basis. But I wanted some sane thinking. She said, just for today, there's a power greater than you. If it's the group, fine. And you were. You were my group. You were my power. She was my higher power at this point. I did everything she told me to do just the way she told me to do it. So I came to believe that there was a power here. A power that could move and change my life. A power that it was so simple that I almost missed it. Because see, y'all don't look like you got much power. Especially the way you are this morning. I mean, look at you. Laying around here like a bunch of women hadn't even sleep or something. But you have power. It's in this very room. Have y'all felt it? Sure you have. It's power, and we all got it, and we don't even know it. It's God in us. And I didn't know that. But that there was power here. And I came to believe in this higher power. She said sanity meant for me on a daily basis. What to do on a daily basis. This is Saturday. You don't need no sanity forever. It's Saturday. The power will get you up. You don't have to believe it all right now, said she. Just believe that there's a power. Doesn't matter whatever. Just a power. Then she read me this. This is out of the page, out of The Wife of the Alcoholic. A great and nameless fear can only be cured by great hope. When all else fails, when we have repeatedly failed and failed our loved ones, we can only become whole again once more by discovering a great hope and a great faith in something dependable. Y'all were my hope. I heard hope from you the first minute I walked in. Y'all were dependable because every Wednesday night you were sitting in your chair. I could depend on you. And when you wasn't in your chair, at your committed meeting, I got scared. Do you hear that, old timers who get tired and want to watch the Academy Awards on television? When you weren't there, I was scared. I needed you to be dependable. And you were. You were at your meeting in your chair, week after week after saying the same boring old thing. Often born in us by the example of some other person whose life was as badly wrecked as ours. but who had found new peace of mind and a successful way of living. We gain no hope from observing the triumph of the strong. It is a victory of the weak who have triumphed over their weaknesses, who a power greater than themselves, which inspires our hope. When a great hope is born within us, we can return to sanity. What seems impossible will become easy. We had been living in confusion. Our lives will now become orderly and clear. We had lacked direction and purpose. We shall find a new purpose for living. We shall enjoy the thrill of setting goals and achieving it. Others have done it, so shall we. My sponsor was my higher power. She gave me direction, and I took it. I turned my life and my will over the care of my sponsor as I understood her. And I did everything she told me. Not always willingly. Today I still do that, and let me tell you, it's not willingly today, because I'm sometimes a lot smarter than she is, and she seems to have forgotten that. My sponsor says, if I can't trust and listen and follow directions of someone here on earth, how can I follow directions of God? And I believe that. My sponsor gives me direction and suggestions, and I do them. She doesn't say, yes, I'll be your sponsor. If you ever need me sometime, call me. I don't know when I need her. For God's sakes, if I knew when I need her, I wouldn't need her. I call my sponsor once a week now. Back then, it was a lot more. I have a direction from my sponsor to return me to sanity. She said, you pray in the morning. You get on your knees. I don't know how to pray, said she. Say, please. You get on your knees at night and you say, thank you. That's all you can say right now. She let me say things later on, but please and thank you. You be at that meeting. After the meeting, she says, why don't you pick up those coffee cups and take them in there and rinse them out and put them in the dishwasher. What a thrill. I was a part of passing the logs, setting up the chairs. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I could go do something and look busy, but I looked a part of. It was very interesting. It was very wonderful. And she says, if the phone don't ring, go make up your bed. If the phone rings, answer it. I don't know what your house looked like when you got here, but my sponsor, not being at my house, knew what my house looked like. It still amazes me. She said, start with one room in your house. Keep the bathroom clean. And then later on, she said, how's that bathroom looking? Well, it's spotless. Well, why don't you start making your bed every day? Then she said, clean the kitchen up, but do one shelf at a time. I mean, little simple things that, a grown-up like me shouldn't have to be told to do. She said, get little pieces of paper and write things on them and tape them up all over your house. So I did. Everywhere. They were just little things on my mirror where I put my makeup on, where I brushed my teeth. I do like that. Yay. Out the back door, in my car, everywhere were these little pieces of paper. At this time, I still learned about a drunk cowboy, and boy, you should have seen the look on his face. He said, my friends are going to come in here, and you're really going to embarrass me with this stuff everywhere, on the refrigerator. Be still, know that I am God. What if they think of when they get on there and get a beer? I said, I really don't care what they think. She said, think of something that will remind you that there's a power greater than yourself, so it will keep in your mind all day. Well, the thing that I thought of is we were talking that instant. I looked over at this sounds so dumb, but this is where I was, folks. There was the doorknob. I was standing there in the kitchen leaning up against the wall, and I saw the doorknob. And I thought, well, doorknobs, I see them all day. I said, okay. Well, when I hung up, I thought about doorknobs. So I went to the back door doorknob and the bedroom doorknob, the bathroom doorknob, and the doorknob to my car, and I got to work, and there's little doorknobs on all the cosmetic cases and stuff. And doorknobs became my click to that there's a power that's greater than me. Now, isn't that the silliest thing? But do you know it worked? It just worked. And I tell that to people I sponsor, and, they just look at me like I'm some kind of idiot. But this is the way I did it. This is the way. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, when I was reading about the second step, it said that God doesn't make the terms too hard for us to meet Him. He just doesn't. I mean, somebody as simple-minded as I can do it. It says in here, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, he has emphatically on his way. And I was on my way and I didn't even know it. I remember one time she said, we're going to have to do step 3. I said, excuse me. Because I'd heard him talk about step 3. Made a decision to turn our lives and our will over the care of God as we understand Him. Now, I didn't know what life was, and I didn't know what will was, and that was too much for me to even understand or have any concept of. And she said, why don't you think about it this way? Instead of life and will, why don't you say attitude and actions? Why don't you turn your attitude and your actions over the care of this God as you understand Him? And I said, well, I could do that. Now, I was sitting in there one night, and I looked up, and on my wall, it says, the 12 steps are there, and I looked, and it said, God as we understood Him. And I realized that I didn't understand Him at all, and that I could start from there. It was absolutely marvelous. And that's where I started. It was a spiritual awakening for me. And then I started thinking, what does as we understood Him mean? So I started listening to y'all as y'all talked about God as you understood Him. And I could take a little piece of your God, and that made sense to me. Your God didn't make sense to me. Yours did, yours didn't, yours did. And I just listened to us talk about our God. And He began to make sense to me. One that didn't make sense to me, that just absolutely drove me insane, was Vannoy. Vannoy said one night at a meeting that she opened her refrigerator door and the egg fell out of the door. And she reached down and she grabbed it before it hit the floor, and she said, oh, thank you, God. I never in my life heard anything so stupid. God in an egg? Come on, get serious. And I went home and I thought about that and I thought about that. An egg? She's crazy. God wouldn't care about an egg. You realize it's 21 years later and I'm still talking about the egg and God? That impressed me so much that I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it. Do you really think God cares about even an egg falling and hitting the floor? Do you really think that? It just is blowing my mind away that God does those things. So we took the third step together. I do it different a little bit than what my sponsor and I did, because I learned as I went through, and I've shared this with her as I went back. There was a man who told me about this. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about what your life and will is, because I didn't know. And I was talking to this gentleman. His name's Albert Myers. Some of you may have heard him. He is such a great AA member, and he and his wife are speakers, so if y'all ever need some speakers, they're great. And Albert and I were talking once, and he said, get the big book out and look at step 3, and it describes what your life and will is. Instead of saying we, say I, and read it out loud and see what that does for you. I said, oh, okay. I picked up, ooh, yuck. It is so awful. When you find out what your life and will is, you don't want it. I mean, you'll turn it over to anybody that'll take it. Briefly, I'm not going to go through all of it, but it says, it's right after the ABCs. It says, we're at step 3. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? Self-will. You can't win on self-will. It says, we are like, each person like the actor who would run the whole show. I read it this way. I am like the actor who would run the whole show. I am forever trying to arrange the lights in the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in my own way. if they would just stay where I put them. If only people was do as I wished, the show would go off great. Everybody, including myself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, I may sometimes be quite virtuous. I may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. Or, on the other hand, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. To get you to do exactly as I want. But as most humans, I am most likely to have all these very traits. At one time or another, I'm going to explain one more time, you see. What usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. I begin to think life doesn't treat me right, so I try to exert myself even more. I become on the next occasion even still more demanding or gracious, whichever the case may be. It still didn't come out right, so admitting that I may be somewhat at fault. I'm sure that other people are quite more to blame. I become angry, indignant, self-pitying. I am a self-seeker. I'm a victim of the delusion that I can get happiness out of the world if only I can manage it and control it right. Isn't it evident to everybody else that if they just let me do it, everything will be all right? Selfish and self-centeredness, that is the root of my problems. This is what I just absolutely hate. Listen to this. Driven by 100 forms of fear, 100. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's 100 forms of fear. 100 forms of self-delusion. 100 forms of self-seeking. 100 forms of self-pity. Listen to what I do. I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. After I step on their toes, they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt me seemingly without provocation. But I invariably find that sometime in the past, I made decisions based on self, which later put me in a position to be hurt. I don't like that. That sounds so awful to me. So our troubles are, we think, of our own making. We can change it. God makes that possible. This is how, and this is why. We have to quit playing God. It don't work. We just have to quit. We have to find out that God is the principal, we are the agent. He is the Father, I am the children. Now listen to what happens. When we take such a sincerely disposition, all sorts of remarkable things follow. Isn't that a fantastic word? Remarkable. I have found it true. I mean, I'm standing here by the, what's this, Mackenzie River? It's the prettiest place in God's earth, and here I'm standing. This is remarkable to me. You can't get here in Oregon by this river from Lubbock County. It don't work. Remarkable things have happened to me. I had a new employer. Being all-powerful, He, God, provided what I needed if I kept close to Him and performed His work well. And I think that means to me, if I stick close to God, that means stick in my meetings, stick to my sponsor, stick to the people that I sponsor, be there at my committed meetings, which are 3 a week. I do those things, then I'm staying right smack dab in this very room where the power is. And I'm performing His work well by showing up, by passing the logs, by 12-stepping somebody over this table last night, by coming here and talking, by doing His work. My life just runs. Remarkable things happen. I feel new power. New peace flows in. I discover I can face life successfully. I discover I'm in the presence of God. Is that something? In this very room, God is. Oh, I was reborn. And then it has a third step prayer, which we're all very familiar with, that I say on a daily basis. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with Thee and do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, so that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life at the McKenzie River in Oregon. May I do thy will always. We think well before taking this step, making sure we're ready, that we could abandon ourselves utterly to God. It says, this is only a very beginning, if honestly and humbly met, an effect, a very great one, was sometimes felt at once. And the third step has brought power into my life. I am not powerless anymore. I know that there is a power. I took the third step, but nothing happened for me at the third step. You know what happened to me? I made a decision. I just made a decision. There was no burning bush. I didn't turn spiritual. I didn't become a Christian. I made a decision. That's all I did. I thought, if I make that decision, I'm going to be in Africa beating them tambourines. And she said no. She said, make a decision, and then we'll work the steps, and we'll see what happens in the 12th step when it says, having had a spiritual experience or awakening as a result of these steps. All you're doing right now is making a decision to see what's going to happen. So, I can do that. If that's all it is, I can do that. I can make a decision to try. That's all I know to do. I think right now I'm going to make a decision to go potty if they're working. Thanks.
Just running and running and running and not stopping, let us know, because that shuts off all of the water to all the rest of the building. And when the water isn't running, if that happens, please don't leave the taps open, because then we end up with water on the floor. So, what was the other announcement? Oh, I have a toothbrush. Appreciate that.
This is the end of session 2, the start of session 3.
You've had a nice lunch. It's warm in here. If I see anybody nodding while I'm up here pouring my guts out, I happen to have a cattle prod. Let me tell y'all a couple of things I forgot. I usually do this on a women's weekend like this. I usually do it on Friday night, or somebody does. But it's just a fun thing that we learned back home a long time ago. That and y'all may do this. I don't know. If you do, well, just have patience with me. And it's looking for your word. On a weekend like this, you're going to hear a word or a phrase over and over and over. I think I have mine, but I'm kind of waiting to see, because it just popped up. You know, you'll hear it from a speaker, you'll hear it in the dining room, or you'll hear it, you know, just as people, or you'll just overhear it. You'll hear it a lot. It'll be used a lot. And that's your word. It's either something you need to work on or have worked on, or God's given you a message. So we always kind of look for our word, and on the way back home in the car, we always compare, well, what was your word? And we'll talk about where we are in that. Another thing that we've always talked about is our own personal angel that's at one of these weekends. We all have an angel. They will give us the word, or they'll give us a message, or they'll say something. They'll hug us when we really needed a hug, or we'll be sitting off by ourselves and somebody comes and sits with us, and maybe they didn't do a thing. Maybe they just were. But you'll have an angel here. And this is such a cute idea. If you have an angel, we'll write her a note. A couple other things. Tonight at the candlelight ceremony, if you would all bring a little piece of paper and a pen. We're going to do something a little different. I think that, oh, look at that. Look at that. Just spilled it all over her.
I was trying so hard.
Right down your throat, too. Totally missed her lips. She just... And let me explain what this is. Someone had asked me about it. This is a gift that was given to me, and it was bound up just for me. It's the sweetest little thing. It's the first 164 pages of the big book and the A's 12 and 12, the 12 steps. And it's bound together in this little thing. It has my little name on it. Isn't that cute? That old fool I'm married to had that done for me. Yeah, so that's what that is. What this is a big, huge book that some people in Odessa, Texas put together about all the information on a step out of all the literature. Some of it's excerpts out of the One Day at a Time, The Life of the Alcoholic, The Dilemma of the Alcoholic. Some is the AA 12 and 12. Some is the AA's big book. But they're all things that they worked out in their group. And one of the girls that I sponsor, named Susan, very lovingly put all this together for me. Isn't that nice? And I've used it to study the steps myself and to give the steps many, many times. So it's kind of shot and worn out, and I just absolutely love it. So this is what this is. It's nothing but our conference to prove stuff, except for the big book. Okay. Somebody said to me a while ago that they were having a terrible time trying to get the 4-step started. They just couldn't do it. And I said, what was said to me, if you're having a terrible time doing the 4-step, perhaps you better back up. Because if you're having that big a time with the 4-step, then you hadn't really probably made a decision. You haven't done your 3rd step correctly. And or if there is a correct, become willing, whatever that takes. It says in here, in the book that has the directions in it, which I love to kind of look at, the big book, about step 3, you know, when it says that we get through and sometimes a spiritual thing will happen to us, sometimes immediately, sometimes it's a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks, but always with the people that I sponsored, when they and I, we and thy, me and thy, if Blanche was here, she'd do it when she started. We kneel together and we take that 3rd step prayer together. And either they have a very real experience right then, or it's a couple of days. They always have one. And I tell them, be sure and let me know what it is. Because God talks to them only in the way they can hear and only the way they can understand. And I want to know what it is. I'm real selfish, you know. So they tell me what it is. And that's always a fun thing, to look for what God's going to give you to know, so that you'll know God heard that you're going to try. That's it. It's no burning bush. He just knows that you're going to try, and He'll let you know in some way that only you can understand that He's done that. So, after we take the 3rd step, it says in the directions, next we launched on a course of vigorous action. The 1st step, which is personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was vital and a crucial step, the 3rd step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. So we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. And I bet that y'all, like I was, I bet, who wants to take 4 step? Anybody just couldn't wait to do it? I didn't know how. I didn't know when. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know all that stuff. My sponsor and her sponsor decided, this is so funny, I love to tell it, they were new in sponsoring. Back then, you know, you're talking 21 years ago. They just didn't, the sponsorship has grown as we've grown. And they decided what they would do with me, my sponsor, and my grand sponsor had a girl that she was, you know, questioning if she had any sanity either. They decided they'd get us together. And on a Sunday afternoon, and they would set us down, and they would show us and explain, because we were so hard-headed, how to do an inventory. So they took us over there. I don't even know what they said. They just visited and da-da-da-da-da and said, you're supposed to write these things. She said, this is the way we do it. And she handed me a little pad and handed Flo a little pad and handed us pencils and pens, and we were supposed to start writing. So I read a little bit and I thought, well, I'm not sure if this is right or not. So finally I said, excuse me, but I need to know if this is what you mean about what we're supposed to take as an inventory. Do you, like, I wasn't married when I had my daughter. Is that what you meant? Flo nearly comes up out of the chair because she's known me for a long time. She says, I didn't think you were ever married to him. I thought you was lying. I knew it. My sponsor and my grand sponsor both turned white as a sheet. And my sponsor yanked me up and took me back in the back bedroom so we could visit quietly. So their one group inventory did not work. So we waited a while, and I suffered over that. I just suffered over that, and she did too. She was one of the worst ones to ever take an inventory, my sponsor. She just whined about it and carried on about it, and a lot of the Al-Anons in our group at that time hadn't done it. So the Al-Anons in my group back then, before I came in, worked with the AA women and said, how do you do it? And the AA women told it because they had to work these steps to stay alive. So they were sharing with my heritage people. I think many of you have met one of my heritage people. I heard somebody couldn't hardly carry her bag, Marcy White. She's my great-great-grand sponsor, and she just worked with the AA women. She loved them, and they taught her, and the AA guys taught her how to work the steps, and she taught Octavia, and Octavia taught Pat, and Pat taught me. So that's my line of heritage, which I absolutely love. If you don't know your heritage, you better find out what it is. Who is your great sponsor, and your grand sponsor, and your great-grand? You better find out who they are. See if they're real. See if they're working a program. See if they're still doing the steps. See if they're still sponsoring people. See if they're still going to meetings. See where your heritage is. Mine are still in meetings every week. They're still sponsoring. They're still doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. Because that's what they were taught, and that's what I was taught, and that's what I do. So, inventory. My sponsor whined, and this lady that got her one day just turned around and flipped at her and just really jumped all over it. She said either, what was it, pee or get off the pot. She's sick and tired of hearing about it, either write or don't. Well, Pat just really pouted over it, but she went home and she wrote. So finally, she listened to me enough that that's the same thing she told me. She said, you just got to write. Get a pencil and paper and write. And then we looked at the big book. The big book says resentment, fear, sex. It's just so simple. If you don't know how, sometimes if you look in the how-to book, it shows you. It tells you exactly. Write on fear, resentment, and sex. Some people make a grudge list. Some people have done that 4-step column, which I've never been able to do because I just don't know how to do that. It's just simply that. The 4-step column that's in the big book that they have suggested tells who you resent and why you resent them. Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't need to take it anyway. So and I can't name my stuff. I can't name it. So what we did was just write on those 3 areas. My first inventory was on those 3 areas. I went back as far as I could remember about the people I resented and why. I went back as far as I could remember about the things I was afraid of and why. And I went back as far as I could remember about sex and why and how many and where and it was rather long. And the things that I did because of that. There is nothing worse than having an inventory and holding it because you don't know what to do with it. Do you put it in your purse where your kids might find it? Do you lay it down on the kitchen table where he might find it? I mean, what do you do with an inventory after you've written it? That's the biggest dilemma I ever had. The reasons to write inventory. If we don't get well. If the alcoholics don't, they get drunk. It's just that simple. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, in there, it's written. 17 times it says inventory written. 17 times I counted one time and marked them off. So, because see, the reason I bring that up is when I sat in meetings, my head was, well, I've been here long enough. I've heard everything. I've pretty well figured it out now, and I know, and I really don't have to write that. I've heard enough of what's said. And it has to be written for it to be a success, and if you want what the program has to offer. the timing of an inventory is real important. Now this is probably, and please listen to me and don't judge me, don't get pissed off at me, listen to me. Probably one of the things that I really hurt and hate about treatment is they put these people in there and they're in there 2 or 3 weeks and they tell them they've gotten the 4th step done and they let them out. And they think they've done a 4th and 5th step. For God's sakes, you can't do that. Do you hear me? You can't do that. It just can't be done. You might write in there, you bet. You might find some things in there, you bet. But until you get here and know there's alcoholism, know that you're surrendered to it, take a 3rd step, and most of us don't like God or don't want God when we get here anyway, or we're confused about God. You've got to get that digested. Then you've got to trust the people in here. You've got to trust someone with all the dirt that you've got, those secrets, that yuck, that take to the grave stuff. That, I don't know, maybe some of you can. Maybe I'm talking out of turn here, but for the ones that I've worked with, the ones that I have observed over and over and over, it takes time. There's a timing. Because you've got to work, the whole thing is you've got to do this first and then that kind of happens. And God loves us and He takes us real slow and He don't miss nothing. His timing's pretty well perfect. Usually around a year in the program is a good time to take an inventory. By the time you've been around here a year, number one, you do understand what we're talking about here. You do kind of feel a part of then. You do want to be a part of then. You've pretty well figured out 1, 2, 3, and it's time to ride. There's a woman in our group who was in the fellowship 17 years and never took an inventory. And she decided that maybe she ought to do that. She was dying. Just literally dying, physically. It was absolutely too late. It changed nothing. She had so much head knowledge and had been around so long and was the old-timer so long, she couldn't let it go. And it did her no good. She's the most miserable human being you've ever seen. It's just really sad. So I am convinced there's a timing. There's a timing, and probably around a year, maybe 2 years. If you go past 2 years, you're way too long. Back up and come on. Let's get it done. An inventory is vital for my recovery. Absolutely, because I, in my head, cannot figure things out. I can't. Because I have the isms. I have the I know best ism. So why in the world would I change anything I'm doing? Because I know it's all right. You know, it's your fault. His fault. So I have to set it on paper. I have to put it down. And once it's out of my head and on paper, it makes all the difference in the world. It is out of here. It's gone. It's out of here. It's on paper. That is such a miracle in itself. Total. What I found is when reading this is that my sponsor can then pick out the character defects in my life today. Character defects. That's all they are. No big deal. A character defect that can be changed. Boy, that was just the best news I've heard. It's like if you have a television and one of the bulbs are, burnt out, you don't throw the television away. You change the bulb and it starts, it's just fine. It finally dawned on me that's kind of what it is. It's a character defect. No big deal. So that's what I did. I sat down and I wrote out fear, resentment, and sex. Took it to my sponsor. Read it to her. She made me read it out loud to her. I was hoping she'd kind of read it and then give me a little critique. But I had to read it out loud. Says she, so I can see your face, so I can hear your voice, so I can see where you're honest, where your pain is. And that's exactly what happened. The pain came. Now, my first inventory. Let me tell you about my first one. It was so god-awful. I mean, the worst one you've ever heard of. Mine was the worst. Of course it was the worst, because it was mine. Then I left out a couple things. I mean, after all. Enough's enough. And do you know what was going to happen when she read that inventory? She was not going to like me anymore. I knew that. I'd lose her love. I'd lose her friendship. I'd lose her respect. And I knew that. And God, I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to do that. So I did the best I could and I left out a couple of things. One I didn't think about, but a couple things I left out on purpose. Took the inventory with her, took a fifth step, read it out loud to her, cried, was full of shame. God, you could do a whole workshop, a whole weekend on shame. The difference in shame and guilt is tremendous. And I got all that stuff out and I felt really good. And she said the one thing to me that was just marvelous. She said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to take this." Whoa, what a statement. Well, then the next meeting night, I watched her like a hawk. I watched her when she came in. I watched who she talked to, what was looks on their face. I watched if she was going to come near me or not come near me. How was she going to treat me? Was she going to hug me? Was she going to shake my hand? Or she was going to nod? I mean, I was absolutely just consumed with what she was going to do when she walked in the door. And I guarantee you, the only thing that happened is that lady loved me more. That's all. She just loved me more. It's the darndest thing I ever saw. A couple weeks after that, they took me, I say they, she and her husband, took me to my first conference. Oh, what a weekend. We were there, similar to this kind of a deal, off in a church camp, small, intimate. You couldn't run, you couldn't hide. The first Friday night speaker, was this lady. Her name is Neva Grissom. She's an AA lady, really famous for listening to fifth steps, by the way. When you in that song. And all she talked about was being honest and thorough in your fourth step. And the more she talked, the more my stomach was in a knot. And she got through. We went to the room, and my sponsor introduced me and said, "This gal needs to talk to you privately." She said, "Okay." And she just broke out in this big old smile, and off we went into the dark. And she said, "Well, what do you need to talk about?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I was told to..." And I was noticing, I just kind of looking around, and I thought, God, look how green everything is. Look at that tree. Now, as far as I know, and I thought I was really stupid. I thought I was just stupid. But as far as I know, there's been like 5 other people that's had this very same experience. I never saw a tree. I didn't pay attention to a tree. I don't think I ever looked up. And there was trees. We were walking today, and I just looked at the trees and the moss, and they were just giggling. They never had, they just didn't pay no more attention to those trees and moss or nothing, because y'all see them all the time. It was just amazing to me. There was wildflowers, and there was birds. I had never in my life experienced that. And the more I heard it, I just kind of felt good, And I got in the breakfast line, and I was waiting. And as I turned around, there was a man there, and he started talking to me. He had the bluest eyes. I mean, the bluest eyes I've ever seen. And I was looking at him and talking to him, and I started, tears were just, he was talking about the day and the weekend and the gratitude, and tears just started coming. And it dawned on me what I was doing. I was standing there looking at a man in the eye. I was letting the man look me in the eye. It was as if he was looking down into my soul, and it was okay. He was clean down there. He was clean. And I started crying. It dawned on me, I'm clean. This very moment in time, I'm a lady. I didn't look down like this like I always looked. I didn't look off over there like I always looked. A man was looking me in the eye, and it was nothing but pure love. I thought, Jiminy Crickets. Maybe this is what they're talking about. Maybe this is what they say when they're talking about the language of the heart. How clean I felt. I felt like I'd been scrubbed with an SOS pad. And my head was up. My chin was not on my shoulder. And I knew at that moment I just encountered God. I knew it for the first time in my life. What an experience. I started bawling and squalling. I bawled that whole weekend. Back then I wore false eyelashes. One was hanging here. I put those things back on. And for the first time ever, I finally laid them on the counter and left them in, and I didn't do that. You didn't see me without makeup. You didn't see me with all my mask on. And I took my mask off. It was really something. It was a marvelous experience. And my experience with God from that day to this has really grown and been blessed and done all kinds of marvelous things. And that was great. Wasn't that great? It was wonderful. And I took the 6th and 7th step, and it was super. Then about a year later, I was in crap again. Just crap again. And I went to my sponsor. What's wrong? Some of this stuff is what we talk about in my inventory. It's supposed to be gone. And so we talked a little bit about that. She said, well, you're a human being, and da-da-da-da-da. But she didn't say anything that really fixed me. And I was really worried. It got me scared because I took a 4th step. I took a 5th step on that stuff. I took the 6th and 7th step like they told me to, and here was some of it back. What was wrong? Well, for the next 3 years, I was after that question because I'd taken a little mini inventory on my marriage at that time with the current alcoholic of the hour. And I discovered the things that were there before. And I talked to Jack, I call him my AA sponsor, my sponsor's husband, and he told me this story, and I listened to him, but it didn't make any sense to me. And then I saw him a little while. 6 months later, I come up. It just took me a long time for me to get this. And it has to do with the 6th and the 7th step. He said to me, we take many inventories. We take many 5th steps along the way. Because it says that this step is taken, the most glaring ones we take real quick. And then after that, it's a lifetime process of taking inventories. I've taken major inventories. That first one was the worst one I ever went through. I've taken inventories on my marriage, on my children, on my parents. Took an inventory once on my sponsor. She had really gotten out of hand. She thought she was this spiritual giant, and I was kind of sick of her stuff, and I wrote this inventory on her. It's the only inventory I hadn't taken with her. After a few days I cooled off, I read it and laughed and tore it up. And the most important thing about 4th and 5th steps to me is I go back to my sponsor and take all of my inventories with her. And I'll go to any length to do that. If I had one come up today, I'd be in Texas at my expense to go to my sponsor to take 5th step. Because it's important that she know everything about me. Everything about me. If I took a little bit of my inventory with BJ, and a little bit of it with Shirley, and a little bit of it with this one and that one, then none of you would really know me. You'd know this part of me, and you know this part of me, and I could manipulate both of you with the parts that you didn't know. So it's very important to take all of my 5th steps with my sponsor, and I knew it had to be her. If she's going to work with me, she's going to know my 5th step. And that's the way I feel. If I'm your sponsor, I'm going to listen to your 5th step. If you can't trust me with your 5th step, then go get a sponsor that you can. Because I'm not going to work with half information. I've had people that's come to me wanting to take 5th steps because of some of my background. The first question I ask you, why aren't you doing this with your sponsor? And if they say to me, my sponsor sent me to you, then I'll take it. Otherwise, I don't listen to it. That's just my choice, it means right or wrong. Because I have to know the information. My sponsor has to know the information, and I want her to. I want help. I don't want to stay this sick, ugly mess. Not at all. So I've taken all my 5th steps with her. I want to go over the list that I have made and that I also got from Marcy, my grand sponsor that was here, and put together of our isms. I told some of you last night, but here's a big list of them that I've really worked on and looked at. Untreated Al-Anon isms, okay? Self-centeredness, the martyr, the knowing best, our denial, low self-image and or low no self-esteem, that we all come in here with that, self-pity, resentments, blaming and complaining, always having to be right. I cannot say I'm wrong. What sticks in my throat? Fear, frustration, easily frustration, depressions, expectations. I expect. Addicted to excitement. Serious. Very dramatic. Oh, can we get dramatic or what? As soon as I get some money saved up, I'm out of here. As soon as the kid get out of school, I'm out of here. As soon as he stops doing this, I'll stop doing that. As soon as. That's some character defects, if you will, that I discovered through the years and keep on discovering in my 5 steps with my sponsor. Very important. All the information on how to take an inventory is in the directions. All the information on how to do a 5th step is in the directions. It's absolutely wonderful. Listening to a 5th step is absolutely wonderful. If you haven't listened to one, you've got a real pleasure coming for you. To sit across the table for somebody or across the room and listen to them pour out this stuff and see them change right before your eyes is something you don't want to miss. You don't have to be a genius or a professional or anything. You just sit and listen and love each other. That's all. We can hear stuff that nobody can imagine. I mean, you just can't imagine the stuff you hear. I've heard it all. There's been one thing that I wished I hadn't heard. One thing in all the years. Just one thing. And that didn't even come from an Al-Anon. It came from an alcoholic. Male alcoholic. And he... and he wanted to tell me one thing. It was taking the grade stuff. And I wish he hadn't told me that. 5th steps. Why we don't want to do that? I mean, taking an inventory is one thing in it. That's what always stopped me. Taking an inventory is the 5th step that comes. You know, you have to be in the 4th step. If you're not in the 4th step, you're screwed. Just be in the 4th step. Don't worry about the 5th step. You don't even do the 5th step till you've done the 4th step. So quit worrying about it. When you get the 4th step done, then it's time to worry about the things. Why do we take it? If we skip this, we not overcome being phony. The alcoholics don't overcome getting drunk. Right, Diane? It's ego deflation. Ego deflation, they say. It gets rid of the terrible sense of isolation. God, this is a disease of isolation. Be you alcoholic, be you Al-Anon. We are isolated. It gives us a sense of belonging. Absolutely. After I'd done my 5th step, it's like, boy, I'd paid my dues. It's like climbing Mount Everest. I didn't think I'd ever do it, and I did it. Look here, I'm on top. Woohoo! You know, here I am. I'm a part of. You'll be amazed, and those of you who've taken it know exactly what I'm talking about. After you take a 5th step, you feel a part of this deal. It's the worst thing we're going to do. Once you get it done, it's done. The feeling of forgiveness, no matter what we've done, the feeling of forgiveness comes. We then start forgiving others. I found out a little bit about humility, and so will you. When you take it, it's almost like humiliation breeds humility, and you figure out the difference of the two. We become what we could be after we've done a 5th step. We become real and honest. And I've got Dash the Velveteen Rabbit, and I see that y'all have that over here, so you know about the Velveteen Rabbit. If you don't have the little book, it's a child's book called The Velveteen Rabbit. Get it. Read it. As I was told, get up in the middle of the bed, get you a nice cup of hot cocoa, and sit there and read it to your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your children, or, you know, read it. It's so fun. Be friends and read The Velveteen Rabbit. It's great. Says, need outside help if we are to surely know and admit the truth about ourselves. I can't admit the truth about myself, but I don't know the truth about myself until I can tell you and you help me see it. It says, when we're honest with another human being, we are then truly honest with ourselves. We can't be honest with ourselves. The little girl stood up here just crying last night. She didn't like nobody. It wasn't that she didn't like nobody. She didn't like herself. Until we like ourselves, we can't like anybody. Very high spiritual development always is on checking will of others for guidance from God. If I need to know what God wants for me, I better check on you. When God starts talking to me and me alone, I might be in trouble. Maybe a little voice. And I'm not saying that God doesn't speak to me, because He has. Not in a booming voice, and these little quiet things in my mind. And through you, some of you, I think, question it, but He really does speak through y'all. So if I'm going to be honest and real, I better check it out for another human being. That's that fifth step. Okay, what happens when we take a fifth step? There's a promise. There's absolutely, totally promise that it's absolutely the truth, bar none. And it says, and this is out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous one more time. We pocket our pride and we go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Alone, by yourself, peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. We thank God from the bottom of our hearts we know Him better. Provided you hold back nothing, your sense of relief will mount from minute to minute. The dammed up emotions of years break out of their confinement and miraculously vanish as soon as they are exposed. As the pain subsides, a healing tranquility takes its place. Many felt God's presence for the very first time, like I did. And those who have had faith already often become conscious of God as they never were before. Isn't that the prettiest thing you've ever heard? I just think it's absolutely, it's marvelous. For the first time, I'm going to feel God's presence. And that's exactly what happened to me. It says, don't hang on to the take it to grave stuff ever. You don't want to miss any of this stuff. They only thought that they had lost fear if you keep back one thing. You only thought you lost your egotism, he says. And you only thought you lost your fear. But we have to tell it all. We have to tell it all to one person. What an experience. What an experience to get that crap out. Sometimes God does all kinds of different things. I want to tell you about the one time with a little inventory that I took in fifth step that God has done a really strange thing. I probably ought to even to do this, tell you a little bit about my moving. My husband, my current husband, sobered up in California. He had a business there, a successful business. He was a plumber, got a plumbing business, and moved to Oklahoma, which he did. And that's when we met and married. And I moved from Texas to Oklahoma. And we were there for several years. And then we went broke. He invested his life earnings into real estate, into some oil leases, right before the big bust. He lost everything. He lost everything he'd been working for years. So he tried to start all over in Oklahoma, and so depressed back there he just couldn't, so we moved back to Texas, which I was thrilled about, and just could not put it back together. So he went to California to his sponsor's 30th birthday. His sponsor is, he's unique. Y'all ever heard of Clancy?
Yeah.
Then you'll understand this statement. He said, well, come home. That's what he said to my husband. So my husband come back to Dallas and announced to me, we're moving to L.A. I said, excuse me. Anyway, that's where I'm at now. Now, this story I'm going to tell you is when I was in Oklahoma. There's a priest back there. He's a drunk priest. He's the craziest drunk priest you've ever seen in your life. He's sober now. And he's so controversial, I'm not even going to tell you what his name is. I love him. Either you love him or hate him. There's no in between. I love the guy. He listens to a lot of fifth steps. Well, we were in the middle of this financial crunch, and my husband was acting strange. I mean, I did not know that when men go broke, they just go devastated along with it. I did not know that a man's ego is so built up on his pocketbook, in his business. I just didn't know that. I'd heard it way back when, but I didn't compute it. So my husband was acting strange and ugly. So I wrote an inventory on money, one little page thing. Now my sponsor's in Austin, and it wasn't that big a deal. It was just it didn't even bother me. Just thought maybe I ought to do this. So I was thinking about this priest. He lived in a little town from where we lived. It'd take an hour and a half to get there, and I didn't want to go do that. And I thought, well, I'll just wait till some. And I talked to Pat about it, and if he came around, sure, it'd be fine. If not, it wasn't any big deal. The next day, he called me. He was down the street visiting, and everybody was gone. Did I have some time for a cup of coffee? So sure. So I go over there, and we have a cup of coffee, and I said, just thinking about you the other day, and I got this little inventory. It won't take 10 minutes. Can you listen to it? He said, sure. So we go off in there, and we're sitting down, and I'm reading about this stuff, and in the middle of the sentence, he stopped me, and he said, Vannoy, have you ever had an abortion? And I said, matter of fact, I have. He said, good, I need to tell you something. This is out of the clear blue sky. He said, you need to finish that up. And I said, well, I've talked about it in my fifth step, and I'm okay with that. He said, no, you're not. He said, you need to take care of this. Let me tell you something to do. He said, the spirit of that child needs to let you know it loves you. This is some unfinished business with you. You need to let that spirit of that child love you, and you need to talk to that little spirit of that child. He said, in meditation, you go somewhere in a church or somewhere quiet, and you get into some meditation and do picture meditations, which I can do. I can imagine a pretty forest, a pretty river. I'll take this home, I'll tell you. He said, just think about that. And in your meditation, have God bring you the child. He said, you already know what that child is, don't you? And I said, well, matter of fact, I do. It already has the name, doesn't it? And just for a second, I said, well, yeah, I guess. He said, well, do this. Go to a quiet place. Ask God to bring the child. See the child. Explain the child what was going to your life at the time. Love it. Let it love you. Hug it. Kiss it. Play with it. And then see God take that child off, and you'll be amazed what happens. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I was going to do it. It was kind of an exciting little adventure. And I was told this friend of mine, she said, oh, we've got a great little chapel. Let me get it fixed for you. She did. I couldn't get there. We were going on a cruise in a couple of days. We left to go to the cruise, and I thought, well, when I get back, I'll get this done. And Marcy was on the cruise, and I was telling her about that. And the next afternoon, she came up. She said, Vannoy, there's a great chapel on this ship. And she took me and showed me the chapel. It was the most amazing chapel you've ever seen. So I go up to this chapel, and I do this. Now, I didn't have one abortion. I had two. So I had two children. And I thought I was the only one in the world that had two. And gosh, I'm just a minor to some people, I found out. And some just have one, whatever. But that's a painful thing for women. So I had these two abortions, and I'm kneeling and I'm praying, and I see this, and these children come, and they come together, and they're just, they're not babies. They're like 2 and 3 and 4, and they're just cute little things. And I share with them, and I cry, and they forgive me, and I forgive myself, and they go off with God. And it was just a marvelous experience. And I got up from there, and the strange thing about it was one of the child was a little boy, and there was a man on that cruise, an old friend of mine. And his name kept coming to me when I was thinking about this little boy's name. And I thought, that's a coincidence, you're doing mind tricks. No, don't do that. And I just kept on, and finally I knew that it had to be his little boy. It was his name, and this little boy was him. It was a marvelous experience. Well, I certainly wasn't going to tell my friend about it. No. Not at all. That was just between me and God, and this little neat experience and this fifth step, and that was the end of that. So I left the chapel, and I go down to the swimming pool, which a swimming pool on a ship is huge, and there's chairs, deck chairs everywhere, and there's jillions of people there. And I see one deck chair empty. And I go over and sit down in the deck chair, and you know who's sitting next to me. You know who it is. And there he is. And I said, oh, jeez. I said, well, I just got to tell you what I've been doing. It just fell out of my mouth, and I was telling him when I was up there, and I said, and so help me, it was your name. It's just this little boy. I have a little boy, and he has your name. It's just the neatest thing. And I turned around and looked at him, and tears were just streaming down his face. He said, my God, I can't believe this. He said, I helped my daughter have an abortion last month, and it is eating me alive. He said, I can't believe this. He says, my daughter can hardly hold her head up. He and I went back up to the chapel. And he and I knelt and we prayed together, and he had the same experience. Now that man is taking that message all over the country to men. He took it to his daughter. He's taking it all over to men. Men hurt over abortion. It's never occurred to me that they did. They hurt. It hurts them. So he's going over the country telling that story, and I'm going over the country telling my story, and the priest is still telling other people about that story. Now, you don't know. I don't ever know what God has in store for me. It was listening to this little soft voice, talking to my sponsor. She should sure go to him. I took this stupid inventory on, I thought, a money problem, and look what come out of that. So I have to have the guidance. Now, when I do inventories, as I told you, that first year, 2 or 3 years, I was so hung up on 6th and 7th step. I was, I just didn't know what you did about that. The first time that I took my inventory, I went in and I did the 6th and 7th step like she told me out of the book. And it was marvelous. It was wonderful, a great feeling. But then it came back. I wanted to try to find the 7th step prayer here. I'm on the wrong thing. Here it is. I got the big book and I read what it said. I was on my knees. And I said the 7th step prayer, which is this. And this is how she told me to do it. My Creator, I am now willing that you have all of me, good and bad. And I never knew that God would take the bad. I thought you had to get really good before you could approach the throne. I didn't think you could talk to God when you had bad stuff. I didn't think He'd even look at you if you had bad stuff. And I discovered in this prayer the good and the bad. Good and bad. God will take bad. To Him it ain't bad. Isn't that a marvelous thing? I pray that you now remove every single defect of character. And she said to name them. Name them right there. Name this defect of character, which was the fear, the resentments, the sex, the whatever we went through. My sponsor lists them for me. I list them for my people that I'm doing this with, and they take it and they do it this prayer. And after I've named that, I say, which stands in the way of my useless for you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go from here to do your bidding. Now that's wonderful, and I believe that He took them. It was great. And then this thing came up, and I didn't know for sure, and I sat in meetings, and people say, well, you really got to work on these inventories and on these character defects. They just don't poof. You've got to work on them, and it's a slow thing. And I think, God, well, how do you work on it? How do you do it? And I'd go, Jack, what do you mean about removing them? It says we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character.